Imagine a city where you literally cannot build a structure on the ground.
Right.
And not because of like earthquakes or floods or anything normal like
Not
that.
just a thing you'd expect.
No, it's because if the ground floor of your house actually touches the earth, the ambient heat from your living room it'll melt the bedrock of the planet beneath you.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. It turns the ground into a semi-liquid swamp, and your entire home will just fracture and sink right into the mud.
Literally swallowed by the earth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you are forced to live your entire life suspended in the air, you know, actively ventilating the heat of your own existence away from the soil, just so the ground doesn't swallow you whole.
It's this profound architectural paradox, right?
Yeah.
Because you are constructing a civilization while simultaneously trying to physically distance that very civilization from the geology it occupies.
Right, you're fighting the ground itself.
Exactly. I mean, we usually view geography as this passive canvas. You know, you pave a road, you drill a foundation, the earth just accepts it.
It sits there.
But in the environment we are looking at today, the landscape is an active, aggressive combatant.
And that hostile environment is the focus of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
For you listening, we are pulling all of our insights today from a singular, just incredibly comprehensive piece of source material, the Lena River Field Atlas.
It's an amazing document.
It really is. And we're not just casually mapping a waterway today. We're exploring what functions as an alien world located right here on Earth.
Yeah, it really feels like another planet.
The Lena River is Russia's most extreme artery, a geographic behemoth that actively shatters our understanding of biology, of civil engineering, and of modern scientific modeling.
Honestly, the word river almost feels insufficient.
Yeah, right. Like it needs a bigger word.
Both culturally and scientifically, it doesn't describe what the Lena actually does. When you parse the data in the atlas, you realize this is a system that forces every single organism, human or otherwise, to make a binary choice.
Adapt or die.
Exactly. Undergo radical, unprecedented adaptation or face complete erasure. And to understand why, you really have to look at the sheer scale of it.
Which is staggering.
Right. The Lena runs for 4,400 kilometers.
Wow.
Yeah, so that is a continuous winding path, roughly equivalent to the distance between New York and Los Angeles.
But in the worst weather imaginable.
Yes, positioned entirely within the most unforgiving climate on the planet.
It starts high up in the Baikal Mountains, near the deepest lake in the world, and carves its way north until it empties into the Laptev Sea, way up high above the Arctic Circle.
And the indigenous populations of this region, the groups that have actually survived this crucible for millennia, they didn't bother giving it some flowery or poetic title.
No, they didn't. They called it Elyun.
Which translates simply to big water.
Big water. I love that. When a landscape is actively trying to kill you for 9 months out of the year, you just, you strip away the poetry.
Exactly. Big water really captures the utilitarian dread, you know, and the physical dominance of the system.
But to really understand the bizarre biological anomalies in this water, or the ancient mythologies born on its banks, you can't actually start with the water itself, right?
No, you can't.
Because the atlas makes it very clear that the defining characteristic of the Lena River isn't hydrologic, it's geologic.
Right. Everything is dictated by the frozen foundation beneath it.
The permafrost.
The permafrost. If you are analyzing the Lena, you are actually analyzing ice.
Yeah.
Look at the macro statistics provided in the atlas. 60 to 65% of the entire Russian landmass is covered by permafrost to some degree.
Which is already a huge amount of land.
It's massive. But the Republic of Yakutia, which is the territory that the Lena slices directly through, is totally unique. It is the only region on the globe situated 100% within the continuous permafrost zone.
And continuous meaning like there are no gaps, right?
Zero gap.
No thawed pockets, no geographic relief.
Exactly. It is a unified, unbroken subterranean shield. And we aren't talking about like a thick frost on the topsoil here.
No, the depths are insane.
The depths we are looking at are staggering. In the central plains of Yakutia, this permafrost reaches depths of up to 500 meters.
Half a kilometer of solid ice and frozen rock just right beneath your feet.
Right. And that is just in the lowlands. In the mountainous regions, the permafrost plunges down to 1,500 meters.
Okay, hold on. Let's make sure the scale of that lands for you listening.
Yeah.
1.5 kilometers deep.
Yeah.
If you took the Empire State Building and you stacked it on top of itself almost 4 times and then buried it underground, you would just be hitting the bottom edge of this frozen layer.
It's almost incomprehensible.
It is. How does biological life even gain a foothold on a kilometer-deep freezer?
Mostly by clinging to the extreme margins. I mean, flora-like trees, grasses, shrubs, they absolutely cannot penetrate that ice shield. Their roots are physically blocked.
Because it's literally rock hard.
Right. So the entire botanical ecosystem is forced to survive in what we call the active layer.
The active layer.
Yeah, it's this paper-thin, temporary layer of topsoil, sometimes only a few dozen centimeters deep, that briefly thaws during the summer months.
So the entire biomass of this massive region is basically balancing on a microscopic sliver of livable Earth.
Which introduces the grand anomaly of the Lena itself. The atlas points out an incredibly specific hydrological fact. The Lena is the only major river in the world where the entire channel, from the source to the delta, flows over continuous permafrost.
And this alters the fundamental mechanics of how a river operates, doesn't it?
Entirely. Normally, in a massive basin like the Mississippi or the Amazon, groundwater plays a critical stabilizing role.
Right, feeding it from below.
Exactly. Subterranean aquifers slowly seep up through porous rock and soil, constantly feeding the riverbed. It creates a baseline flow that keeps the river relatively stable, even during a drought.
But the Lena doesn't have a basement.
It doesn't.
That continuous permafrost acts like impenetrable concrete. The groundwater is trapped a kilometer down, completely blocked by the ice shield, so the river gets absolutely zero feeding from below.
Zero subterranean base flow, which leaves the entire 4,400-kilometer system 100% reliant on external surface-level precipitation.
Rain and snowmelt.
Just rain and snowmelt.
But think about that. If the earth beneath the river is frozen concrete, that means the earth surrounding the river is also frozen concrete.
Right.
So when the spring thaw hits and millions of tons of snow begin to melt across the Siberian taiga, that water can't sink into the ground. It can't be absorbed at all.
It is entirely rejected by the landscape.
It's essentially a continental-sized bathtub where the drain has been welded shut.
That's a great way to picture it.
Instead of a slow, regulated flow filling it up, nature just drops millions of tons of melting snow into the basin all at once. The water has no vertical escape, so it has to move laterally, fast.
And that lack of vertical absorption creates one of the most volatile, violent hydrological systems on the planet. When that spring melt occurs, the water rushes directly into the river channel simultaneously.
Like a flash flood, but on a continental scale.
Exactly. It causes explosive, catastrophic flooding. We are talking about water levels rising by tens of meters in a matter of days.
It creates this really intense bipolar personality for the river. The researchers in the atlas refer to it as the hydrological pendulum.
The pendulum, yes.
The river swings between these two absolute extremes of existence, dictating the rhythm of life and death across the entire republic.
Well, let's trace the arc of that pendulum, starting with the winter phase. The deep freeze.
Okay.
Because there is no groundwater feeding it, and the surface is locked in snow, the Lena effectively starves.
It shrinks.
Right. The water levels bottom out and the extreme cold takes over. But a river this massive doesn't just, freeze into a flat, peaceful sheet of ice.
Because the kinetic energy has to go somewhere, right? The water is still trying to move as it freezes, pushing against itself against the shores.
The hydraulic pressure is immense. As the water crystallizes and expands, the sheer force of the current pushing against the newly formed ice creates massive, violent structural failures.
Yeah, the ice fractures and thrusts upward.
Creating these jagged, chaotic blocks known as toros.
The photographs of these toros in the atlas are just surreal. You look at them and you think you're looking at jagged rock formations or tectonic uplifts.
But it's pure ice.
Pure ice. They erupt from the surface, rising high above the height of a human being. The river becomes this impassable, hostile wasteland of towering ice spikes.
It acts as an absolute barrier to movement. You literally cannot cross it. But then the pendulum swings. The brief, intense Siberian summer arrives. The season of the white nights.
Where you have 24 hours of continuous sunlight baking this frozen landscape.
Right.
And because of that bathtub effect we talked about, the toros melt, the massive continental snowpack melts, and the river experiences a violent resurgence.
The water levels explode upwards, transforming that jagged wasteland into a vast, mirrored inland sea. And suddenly, the Lena reawakens as Yakutia's primary, and in many places only, transport artery.
It's rush hour.
Exactly. This is when the region frantically mobilizes. Ships, barges, industrial supplies, everyone rushes to move goods.
But the tension here is the timeline. because this navigable window is brutally short.
So short.
You have a fleeting 2 to 3 months before the temperature drops and the toros begin to form all over again.
Yeah, they have to execute a year's worth of logistical shipping for an area roughly the size of India in about 8 weeks.
That's insane. The logistical anxiety must just be a permanent fixture of life there.
It absolutely is.
But to truly appreciate the sheer volume of water moving during this brief summer window, we need to trace the velocity profile mapped out in the atlas. It reads like an escalating study in kinetic dominance.
It does. It starts at the upper course, up near the Baikal Mountains. And it doesn't begin as some sluggish stream. It is born as an aggressive, violent mountain river.
Yeah.
It carves through high, constraining rocky shores. The atlas clocks the flow speed up there at 5 meters per second.
And for those listening, 5 meters per second in a waterway is incredibly fast. That is water moving at over 11 miles an hour. But it's not just water. It's carrying an immense load of sediment, gravel, and debris.
It's basically a liquid avalanche.
Right. If a human falls into a 5 meter per second current in subarctic temperatures, the mortality rate is virtually absolute.
But it doesn't maintain that rapid, chaotic energy. As it pushes north past the town of Karenga, it enters the middle course. The geology changes. The high, rocky shores retreat. The channel deepens, and it widens out.
So the aggressive mountain flow pacifies.
Yes.
It transitions from a violent sprint into this steady, relentless march. It is gathering volume, preparing for the colossal final phase, the lower course, after the Alden River joins it.
And this is where the physical scale of the Lena kind of stops making sense to the human brain.
It really does.
In the lower course, the main channel expands to 10 kilometers wide.
Over 6 miles across.
Yeah, and when the massive tributaries dump into it, the river balloons to over 20 kilometers wide, plunging 15 to 20 meters deep.
Okay, if you were standing on one bank of a 20-kilometer wide river,
You literally could not see the opposite shore.
no, you couldn't. The curvature of the Earth and the atmospheric haze over the water would obscure it. You are effectively looking at a freshwater ocean horizon.
Which begs a massive fluid dynamics question.
Yeah, when a river is 20 kilometers wide, how does it even maintain a directional current? Why doesn't it just spread out into a massive stagnant lake? At what point does a river stop acting like a river and just become a creeping sea?
The only way a body of water that massive maintains forward momentum is through an astronomical input of continuous kinetic energy.
Right.
And that energy is supplied by the great arteries. The Lena is not a solitary actor. It is a compounding system powered by 4 massive tributaries that are geographical titans in their own right.
The atlas breaks these 4 down, and they operate like massive engines driving the main current. First is the Viluwe.
Yes.
It's the longest feeder, clocking in at 2,650 kilometers long, draining a massive basin of 454,000 square kilometers across Krasnoyarsk and Yakutia.
And by any standard metric, the Viluwe is a primary continental river. Here, it is merely a tributary.
Just a side piece.
Exactly. Then you have the Aldan. The Atlas gives it the moniker the heavyweight, and for good reason. It is the most full-flowing right tributary of the system, aggressively powered by its own massive feeders like the Amga and the Maya.
Yeah.
The Aldan dumps the drainage of a 729,000 square kilometer basin directly into the Lena.
Think about the physics of that convergence. You have 2 massive bodies of water colliding. It's like 2 multi-lane highways merging at full speed without a yield sign.
Oh, absolutely.
The sediment loads, the temperature differentials, the sheer acoustic roar of that much water slamming together.
Yeah.
It must take miles for the 2 rivers to actually blend.
It does. You can often see a distinct seam in the water from satellite imagery where the different sediment loads of the rivers refuse to mix for kilometers.
Wow.
Adding to this immense pressure is the Olyokma, the southern link, which drags water up from the Zabakalski Krai. And finally, the Vidam.
The gold vein.
Yes, the Vidam is culturally legendary. It brings water from roughly 1,000 smaller, highly mineralized tributaries known for intense gold mining. It's an area so wild and treacherous, it inspired the classic Russian novel, Ugrium River.
So you have these 4 titans, the Viluwe, the Aldan, the Olyokma, and the Vidam, taking the explosive snowmelt from half a continent and injecting it into the Lena.
Right.
That compounding pressure is the only way a 20-kilometer-wide wall of water can keep pushing north into the Laptev Sea.
Precisely. And when you look at the sheer, terrifying physical dominance of this system, I mean, a river that freezes into ice spikes, violently floods, expands to the width of an ocean, and sits atop a kilometer of solid ice, The idea of human settlement doesn't just seem difficult, it seems wildly irrational.
It feels like an act of profound hubris.
It really does.
Like, why look at a landscape that is actively trying to kill you and decide to build a city? But humans didn't just stumble through here. They dug in. They engineered ways to force a stalemate with the extremes.
They did. The atlas maps out the human footprint along the Lena, designating what it calls the 6 outposts.
Okay, outposts, yeah.
These are the precarious, heavily engineered footholds of civilization, strung out across thousands of kilometers of hostile wilderness.
You have Kerensк, the oldest, founded as an imperial fortress back in 1630. Then there is Uskut. The atlas refers to it as the gates to the north.
Uskut is fascinating from a logistical standpoint. It is the sole port where the Lena River intersects with the national railway system, specifically the BAM, or Baikal-Amur Main Line.
And for those who aren't familiar, the BAM was this massive, incredibly difficult Soviet railway project built parallel to the Trans-Siberian Railway, designed to access these remote, resource-rich areas.
Right.
Building a railway over permafrost is a total nightmare. But Uskut is where that iron road finally meets the water. It's a transfer point for survival.
Moving down the river, you have Olyokminsk, deeply tied to timber and the gold trade we mentioned with the Vidum. You have Lensk, which is a massive industrial hub for diamond mining and oil extraction. And Pokrovsk, the cultural and historical heart of the district.
But the crown jewel of extreme survival engineering is Yakutsk.
Yakutsk, yeah.
This is the undisputed capital of the permafrost zone. We're talking about a major city where the average January temperature is negative 40 degrees Celsius.
Let's just pause on negative 40 degrees for a moment.
Please do.
At that temperature, physics starts behaving strangely. Standard structural steel becomes brittle and can snap under tension. Rubber tires shatter like glass if they are left sitting and then suddenly moved.
It's incomprehensible cold.
And Yakutsk is not a small scientific outpost. It is a sprawling city, the largest on Earth, built entirely on continuous permafrost.
Which brings us back to the stilt city engineering we talked about at the very beginning. The existential threat to Yakutsk isn't actually the cold, is it?
No, it's not.
It's the heat the city generates.
Exactly. Every human structure generates ambient heat. We heat our rooms, our bodies generate warmth, our electrical grids radiate thermal energy.
Right.
If you pour a standard concrete slab foundation directly onto the permafrost, that thermal energy leaches downward.
It slowly thaws the active layer. Then it hits the deep permafrost. The ice binding the soil together turns to liquid. The ground loses all structural integrity, and the building fractures under its own weight and sinks.
And to prevent a citywide collapse, civil engineers had to completely rethink how a building interfaces with the earth. They adopted the stilt architecture.
Right.
Every major structure, apartment blocks, shopping centers, municipal buildings, is mounted on deep, reinforced concrete piles that are driven deep into the permafrost.
I want to make sure the mechanics of this are clear. How do you drive a concrete pile into a kilometer of frozen rock-hard ice? You can't just hammer it in, can you?
No, you actually have to temporarily melt it.
Melt it.
Yeah. They use pressurized steam to thaw a vertical column of permafrost. They immediately drop the reinforced concrete pile into the resulting mud, and then they wait.
Oh, wow.
The brutal ambient temperature of the earth freezes the mud back into solid permafrost, locking the pile into the ice shield with absolute rigidity.
That's ingenious.
Yeah.
But the key is what happens above the ground, right? The pile lifts the bottom floor of the building completely off the earth, leaving an open, freezing airspace of a few meters between the structure and the soil.
That open airspace is the lifesaver. The ambient, freezing subarctic winds blow continuously under the buildings. As the heat from the floorboards radiates downward, the wind catches it and ventilates it away before it can reach the permafrost below.
So it is exactly like building a high-end computer.
Yes.
If you mount a blazing hot motherboard directly against a metal case, it will overheat, short out, and melt. You have to mount it on little metal standoffs so the cooling fans can push air underneath the circuit board and carry the heat away.
Exactly.
Yakutia is essentially a massive heat-generating motherboard mounted on concrete standoffs, utilizing the freezing Siberian wind as its cooling fan to protect the planetary casing below it.
It is a brilliant, highly precarious equilibrium, but it requires constant vigilance. If the global climate warms or if a building's ventilation fails, the permafrost degrades and the infrastructure immediately begins to fail.
The tension between human engineering and the landscape is just a constant, quiet war.
It is.
But not all engineering in this region is a calculated, precise victory. Sometimes it's just terrifying, desperate improvisation.
Yes, it is.
The atlas outlines a piece of infrastructure that genuinely looks like a mistake. The Vitim River Bridge.
The Vitim River Bridge is infamous. It is a visceral monument to the desperation of 1980s Soviet engineering. It was originally constructed as a temporary river crossing to move heavy equipment during the construction of the BAM Railway.
And temporary is the scariest word you could apply to a bridge in Siberia.
Definitely.
Let me paint a picture of this for you. Imagine a bridge stretching 500 meters across.
That is half a kilometer of bridge.
Half a kilometer. It is suspended 15 meters in the air over the raging, freezing floodwaters of the Vitim River waters that can violently rise up to 25 meters deep during the spring thaw.
And the physical dimensions of the deck are terrifying. The bridge is merely 3 meters wide. That is barely wide enough for the wheelbase of a single large truck.
But the width isn't the problem. The problem is that there are absolutely zero safety railings.
None.
Nothing between you and a 15-meter drop into freezing rapids and the driving surface. It isn't paved. It isn't even solid steel.
No.
It is constructed entirely of loose, unrailed wooden planks laid horizontally over old railway ties.
Wood that, for 9 months of the year, is coated in a frictionless sheen of ice and snow. And because it sits high over a massive river valley, brutal crosswinds constantly whip across the deck, threatening to physically push vehicles off the edge into the abyss.
The craziest detail in the atlas is that this bridge was officially condemned and closed in 2016. It was deemed critically, structurally unsafe.
Right.
But the local population, completely isolated and driven by the uncompromising necessity of moving supplies, just ignored the closure.
Because there was no alternative route.
Right, they would literally film themselves doing it. You can find the footage. Drivers taking multi-ton heavy-duty Ural trucks across rotting, icy wooden planks with no railings, the wood groaning and shifting under the tires, 15 meters above a freezing river with the wind howling.
It highlights a very specific psychology born out of absolute geographical hostility. In environments like this, the standard rules of safety and infrastructural regulation that govern the rest of the world simply evaporate.
Yeah.
When survival requires you to cross the Vitim, you cross the Vitim, regardless of the structural integrity of the wood.
Thankfully, it looks like that specific nightmare is ending. The atlas notes that a 1 billion ruble reconstruction project began recently, promising a safe, modern auto route by 2026.
We will see if the permafrost and the floodwaters allow that new engineering to hold. Because while human engineering here is an exhausting, hyper-expensive battle against the extremes, the biological ecosystem of the river doesn't fight the extremes.
No, it doesn't.
It leans into them.
The biology of the Lena is a masterclass in extreme evolutionary adaptation. The creatures that live here aren't just surviving. They are utilizing the hostility of the environment in ways that challenge our understanding of biology.
Let's look at the taxonomy provided in the atlas. The waters under the ice sustain an ancient, aggressive food web. You have massive populations of Siberian sturgeon, pike, grayling, and dace thriving across the length of the river.
Right.
But there are highly specialized species that stand out, beginning with the toucan.
The toucan, historically referred to as the Tsar's herring. It's a small fish, considered an absolute delicacy, ranging from the Delta down to the Aya River. But the atlas highlights a truly bizarre chemical trait.
Very bizarre.
When you pull a toucan fresh from the freezing waters of the Lena, it emits an intense, highly specific smell that is absolutely identical to freshly sliced cucumbers.
It is a remarkable olfactory anomaly.
But biologically, why? How is a fish swimming in subarctic waters naturally synthesizing the chemical aromatic profile of a warm-weather vegetable? What is the evolutionary mechanism there?
It comes down to the biochemistry of surviving in freezing water. To keep their cell membranes fluid in sub-zero temperatures, these fish have highly specialized lipid profiles.
Okay, fats.
Specifically, high concentrations of polyunsaturated fatty acids. When the fish is pulled from the water, enzymes rapidly break down these specific fatty acids, producing a class of chemical compounds called aldehydes.
And aldehydes are the exact same volatile organic compounds that give cucumbers their distinct smell.
Precisely. It's a case of convergent chemistry. The fish isn't trying to smell like a cucumber. It's utilizing a specific fat structure to keep its blood from freezing, and the byproduct of that fat breaking down in the air happens to perfectly mimic a garden vegetable.
That is just wild. Next in the taxonomy is the cheer, which the atlas labels the heavyweight. This is a massive, rapidly growing fish packed with heavy, dense meat.
Yes.
But its behavior is highly restricted. It dominates the lower, massive reaches of the river, but it rarely ventures upstream past Yakutsk. It requires the deep, wide, relentlessly cold expanses of the northern channels to thrive.
Which is a stark contrast to the muksun. The muksun is labeled the survivor. The massive delta where the Lena meets the Laptev Sea is home to 4 unique varieties of this fish.
And what makes the muksun fascinating is its supreme osmoregulatory adaptability.
Yes, its ability to handle intense shifts in water salinity.
Because of that bathtub effect again. When the spring melt happens, millions of gallons of pure fresh water violently flush into the saltwater bays of the Laptev Sea Delta.
Exactly. For most freshwater fish, suddenly being pushed into a brackish or saltwater environment would cause massive cellular shock and death.
Yeah, they can't handle it.
But the muksun thrives on the chaos. During the massive spring flushes, it effortlessly migrates out into the temporarily freshened saltwater bays of the ocean, utilizing feeding grounds that would be toxic to the rest of the river species.
But even the muksun's adaptability pales in comparison to the true apex of evolutionary mystery in this river, the Lena Omul.
The Omul is the defining biological puzzle of the Lena. It is a genetically distinct predator, separate from the famous Omul found in Lake Baikal. It is highly aggressive, feeding on small crustaceans and the fry of other fish.
But its diet isn't the anomaly.
No.
The anomaly occurs at the end of every brief summer. In late August, the Omul initiates what the atlas calls the impossible migration.
It is one of the longest, most grueling freshwater spawning runs on the planet. The Omul leaves the delta and migrates a staggering 1,500 kilometers upstream, fighting directly against the aggressive current of the Lena River.
Let's just look at the sheer physics of this, 1,500 kilometers upstream.
It's massive.
In a river that, as we discussed, moves at speeds up to 5 meters per second in its upper reaches. The caloric burn required for a fish to fight a current that strong for that long in freezing water should be a metabolic impossibility.
Yeah, it should burn through its fat reserves and die before it gets halfway.
But it doesn't.
The endurance required is staggering, yes. But the metabolic feat is actually secondary to the true mystery. The Atlas explicitly states that modern biology has absolutely no empirical explanation for how the Omul navigates this route.
It perfectly remembers a 1,500-kilometer path. It somehow avoids the deadly shallow waters, navigates around thousands of shifting sandbars, dodges massive underwater debris fields, and pinpoints highly specific micro-local spawning grounds year after year.
And we have to eliminate the standard biological navigation systems one by one here. It cannot rely on visual memory because the water is deep, often dark, and highly turbid with sediment.
Right. And it can't rely on spatial topography because, as we established, the river violently freezes, fractures, and floods every single year. The physical layout of the sandbars and channels is completely different every time the fish makes the run.
And while many fish use geomagnetic reception to navigate on a macro scale, sensing the Earth's magnetic fields, that doesn't explain the micronavigation required to dodge a newly formed temporary sandbar or find a specific rocky inlet.
So what does that leave? Olfaction. Could the Omul be operating like a chemical bloodhound? Could it be reading a highly specific 1,500-kilometer chemical signature trailing through the water?
Well, olfactory mapping is the primary mechanism for migrating salmon, who lock onto the specific chemical scent of their birth stream.
Right.
But the volatility of the Lena makes a stable chemical trail highly improbable. When the spring melt dumps millions of tons of fresh, pure snowmelt into the basin, the river is massively diluted. How does a delicate, precise chemical scent survive that annual continental washing machine?
It defies our current mapping capabilities. We literally do not know how they know where to go.
We really don't.
And this defiance of expected biological rules extends beyond the water, right up onto the shores. The Atlas highlights 2 massive geological and botanical anomalies sitting directly on the permafrost. Let's talk about the tuculans.
The tuculans are geographically surreal.
Yeah.
You are moving through the dense, frozen Siberian taiga of the Vilyu Basin, an environment dominated by ice and pine, and suddenly you encounter massive, towering, Sahara-like sand dunes rising directly out of the permafrost.
It's a complete biome clash. Sand dunes belong in arid deserts, not sitting on top of a kilometer-deep ice sheet. How do they exist?
They are Aeolian anomalies, relics of ancient wind patterns from the Pleistocene epoch.
Okay, the Ice Age.
Right. During the last ice age, this region was a frigid, arid polar desert. Massive winds swept vast quantities of sand across the ice. As the climate shifted and the taiga forest eventually grew over the permafrost, these massive dunes were trapped and preserved,
Creating these bizarre, isolated desert ecosystems completely surrounded by frozen forest.
Exactly. And speaking of the forest, the second anomaly is Tittery, or Larch Island. This represents the absolute northernmost outpost of the Dahurian larch tree.
We talked earlier about how the continuous permafrost completely blocks root systems, forcing plants to survive in a tiny, shallow, active layer of topsoil.
Which usually restricts plant life in extreme northern latitudes to low-lying shrubs, mosses, and lichens. Trees simply cannot anchor themselves or draw in enough nutrients to grow tall.
Yet on Tittery, despite being at an extreme hostile latitude where large trees should be biologically impossible, these specific Dahurian larches soar up to 30 meters high.
30 meters. A 10-story building made of dense wood and needles, standing on top of a kilometer of solid ice, surviving negative 40-degree winters and brutal winds, anchored in only a few dozen centimeters of thawed soil.
How is it not instantly blown over?
It survives through an incredibly complex horizontal root system that spreads out widely just under the surface, interlocking with the roots of other trees to create a unified structural mat over the ice.
Like a net.
Yeah. Furthermore, they rely on highly specialized symbiotic fungi in the soil to extract the microscopic nutrients available in that thin, active layer.
The recurring theme here, from the cucumber-scented fish to the impossibly navigating omole to 10-story trees growing on ice, is that this environment pushes biological life to engineer solutions that border on the miraculous.
It really does.
It points to something fundamental. There are forces beneath the surface of the Lena and beneath the permafrost that our science cannot yet fully map or explain.
Which perfectly transitions our deep dive into its final, most mysterious layer. Because when empirical science reaches the edge of its mapping capabilities, when we find physical anomalies we cannot measure or explain, we inevitably cross over into the realm of history, culture, and mythology.
And the physical landscape of the Lena is heavily guarded by monuments that blur the line between natural geology and ancient purposeful architecture.
The surface of the river is bordered by massive geological structures that command absolute awe. The most famous and visually striking are the Lena Pillars.
The imagery of the Lena Pillars in the Atlas is haunting. They are these massive, intricately shaped rock formations stretching for dozens of kilometers along the riverbanks.
They don't look like mountains.
No, they don't. They are towering vertical spikes and columns of rock.
Their appearance is so structured, so vertical and fortress-like, that fringe theorists and internet sleuth constantly attempt to argue they are the petrified ruins of an ancient, lost civilization's defensive wall.
Geologically, how do they actually form?
They are the result of extreme freeze-thaw weathering operating over millions of years. The bedrock here is highly fractured along vertical fault lines.
Okay.
Water seeps into these vertical cracks during the summer, freezes solid during the winter, and expands, shattering the rock outward. Over eons, this process strips away the weaker rock, leaving only these massive vertical pillars standing.
But visually, they look deliberate. And they aren't the only formations that mimic architecture. You have Tabastack, which translates to deer head. This is a towering 100-meter rocky massif sitting on the banks, topped with bizarre stone pillars known locally as kigalacs.
And the kigalacs hold deep cultural significance because they eerily resemble ancient, towering figures, humanoid shapes and beasts appearing to stand eternal watch over the flow of the river.
Then, right at the start of the massive delta, marking the final stage of the river's journey into the Arctic Ocean, stands Stolp Island.
Stolp Island, yes.
It's a 114-meter-high sheer dome of rock. But the Atlas specifies it is 400-million-year-old Devonian carbonate rock.
Which is fascinating context. The Devonian period was the age of fishes, a time when the Earth was significantly warmer. Carbonate rock is typically formed from the compressed shells and skeletons of ancient marine life in warm, shallow seas.
Right.
Finding a towering dome of it isolated in the freezing Siberian Arctic is a jarring testament to deep geological time.
It stands completely isolated in the water. And according to local indigenous legend, it wasn't pushed up by tectonic pressure. The myth states it was raised by a powerful ancient shaman to mark the grave of his daughter.
The mythology of the region is inextricably woven directly into the stone of the river. But here is where the Atlas introduces data that is genuinely unsettling.
Yeah.
The mysteries aren't confined to the rock formations on the surface. It's what is happening beneath the surface that defies explanation.
The Atlas details a phenomenon it categorizes as acoustic anomalies.
No.
This is the point where our modern, high-tech scientific data collides directly with those ancient myths.
Below the surface of the Lena, extensive mapping efforts have revealed a network of deep, unmapped karst sinkholes lining the riverbed.
Let's clarify what a karst sinkhole is for a moment. It's not just a dent in the mud, is it?
No.
Karst topography is formed when slightly acidic water slowly dissolves soluble bedrock like the ancient limestone and carbonate we just talked about, for thousands of years. It creates massive subterranean voids, caves, and deep shafts hidden entirely beneath the riverbed.
They are immense flooded subterranean chambers. And when research vessels run advanced echo sounders over these specific karst areas, the equipment doesn't just return standard topographical depth data.
It picks up highly anomalous readings.
Readings that do not match the expected bottom topography, nor do they match the acoustic signature of any known biological life, like a massive school of fish.
But the truly inexplicable data point isn't visual sonar. It's the audio.
Yes.
Researchers have documented strange, low-frequency sounds emanating from the depths of these flooded sinkholes. And the atlas makes it very clear these are not the random, chaotic rumbles of shifting rocks or water pressure.
No, they possess a highly specific, measurable structure. The low-frequency acoustic pulses last for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes, down to the second, before suddenly and completely vanishing into total silence.
When I read that, it instantly sent a chill down my spine. An exact, repeating 4-minute duration that completely defies natural biological rhythms.
It does.
A whale doesn't sing on a precision stopwatch. A shifting tectonic plate doesn't grind for exactly 240 seconds and then pause.
From a purely empirical standpoint, an exact, repeatable duration implies a cyclical, systematic mechanism.
It sounds mechanical. It sounds like an automated system, like a massive subterranean pressure valve in the Earth's crust venting on a precise timer, or some kind of deep Earth acoustic beacon transmitting a signal we simply don't have the context to understand.
It represents a total blind spot in our geological and biological mapping of the river. And historically, when humans encounter a natural mechanism they cannot measure or explain, especially one that emits low-frequency vibrations from hidden depths, they contextualize it through mythology.
Which brings us to the ancient Burya shamanists and their concept of the Black River.
The ancient Buryak cultures had a very distinct, highly codified relationship with the north, and with the Lena River specifically. And that relationship was defined by absolute existential terror.
They associated the North entirely with malevolent forces. The superstition was so deeply ingrained in their daily lives that even an animal, like a dog, barking toward the North was considered a fatal, catastrophic omen.
You did not look north. You did not travel north.
And they absolutely refused to approach the Lena. They stripped it of its identity, refusing to use its given name, referring to it in their oral traditions only as the Black River.
They believed its dark, freezing waters were a literal realm of punishment, harboring the souls of sinners.
But it wasn't just a spiritual metaphor. Their shamanic records warned of a physical presence, a colossal ancient entity residing in a deep burrow to the northeast of the river.
A deep burrow, which is an incredibly accurate ancient translation for an unmapped subterranean karst sinkhole.
Exactly. The legend stated that this massive entity could hibernate in these burrows for years or centuries, only to violently emerge, consume everything in the river's path, and then retreat back into the dark depths.
If we synthesize the empirical limits of modern science with this ancient cultural memory, a fascinating pattern emerges.
Yeah.
Why invent a monster? The Buryak people clearly understood that these waters were not empty. They recognized a deeply dangerous power, perhaps violent geological venting, perhaps an undiscovered biological apex predator.
Right. They lacked sonar and echo sounders to map the sinkholes.
So they encoded a survival warning into a mythological monster stay away from the deep burrows.
And it is so easy for us, sitting in the modern world, to write off a colossal, hibernating river entity as pure, primitive superstition. We assume we have the whole world mapped on our phones.
Yeah.
But then the atlas documents the 2016 sighting.
Yes, the moment when modern technology violently intersects with ancient folklore.
In 2016, a piece of mobile phone footage surfaced from the river. It captured a massive serpentine anomaly, physically displacing the water of the Lena.
And researchers analyzing it confirmed it wasn't a freak wave, it wasn't a wake from a boat, and the displacement was vastly larger than any known sturgeon.
It was a massive, physical, unknown entity moving purposefully and aggressively through the current.
It is the ultimate embodiment of what the Atlas classifies as the untamed zone. Whether that footage captured a newly discovered, massively overgrown species of predatory fish or something older and entirely unknown to taxonomy, it proves a terrifying and humbling point.
It proves that even in our modern era, of satellite imaging, GPS, and advanced sonar, massive, uncompromising blind spots remain.
They absolutely do.
The Lena River proves that the natural world still retains its secrets, hidden beneath a kilometer of ice.
It forces a posture of extreme humility. We map the outposts, we engineer our brilliant stilt cities to conquer the permafrost, we build our terrifying wooden bridges, and we convince ourselves we have tamed the landscape.
But we haven't.
No, the Lena constantly, violently reminds us that we are just skimming the very fragile surface of a much deeper, much older, and vastly more powerful system.
And that brings us to the end of our journey through the Atlas today. Let's take a step back and really look at what we've explored. The Lena River isn't just a line of blue on a map of Siberia. It is a supreme arena of Earth's untamed extremes.
It is a geographical crucible, a place where human civilization desperately engineers stilt cities just to avoid melting the ice they stand on, and where people push heavy machinery across terrifying wooden bridges out of pure, uncompromising survival necessity.
It's a bizarre biological theater where evolutionary pressure creates fish that smell exactly like fresh cucumbers, where ancient sand dunes defy frozen taiga, and where massive geological pillars stand guard over hidden subterranean sinkholes emitting exact 4-minute acoustic pulses.
For you listening, in a modern world plagued by absolute information overload, where we are constantly told that every inch of the globe has been surveyed, mapped, categorized, and solved, there is an incredible, profound value in knowing that this simply isn't true.
It is deeply refreshing, knowing that a 4,400-kilometer river can still hold on to massive, unexplained biological and geological mysteries. It reminds us that the Earth is still wildly capable of surprising us.
It keeps the human drive for curiosity alive. We need the murky waters. We need the blind spots to remind us of our scale.
We absolutely do. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final speculative thread to mull over. We spent this time looking at these supposedly separate anomalies in the river. We have the Lena Omul, executing an impossible 1,500-kilometer migration without any known biological mechanism for navigation. And we have those unmapped karst sinkholes, venting those highly precise 4-minute low-frequency acoustic sounds.
Two immense mysteries operating in the exact same river system.
So what if they aren't separate at all? What if those unmapped karst sinkholes, venting those 4-minute acoustic pulses, are somehow the actual key to the Omul's impossible navigation?
That is a fascinating hypothesis, connecting the biological anomaly to the geological one.
What if these deep earth sinkholes are creating a unique, pulsing acoustic highway, a repeating frequency beacon echoing through the deep channels that biological life like a migrating predator fish has spent millennia evolving to feel and follow? Human science is looking for chemical trails or magnetic fields, but maybe we just haven't learned how to read the river's actual frequency. The instruments of modern science might be looking at the Lena completely wrong. The river has its own pulse, and we just need to learn how to listen to it.